I don't know if anyone.
I have the chat box up, just looks small. So I can like glance at it and my notes.
Okay. No, I'm going to need to. I'm going to do is exit full screen just so I can see your bio.
Arizona, Texas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our afternoon session. We definitely are so happy to have you here to bring awareness to Black Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week. And definitely very excited to discuss this topic with you today. And so happy that you could make it. Good morning for some of you if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. So we're definitely super happy to have you here today. And we will get started. So I'd like to start just by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Melissa Lauren Hooks. I have a doctorate in organizational leadership. However, my career has been mainly in the hospital sector as well as Brown University in education. I'm a researcher by trade, and also I do medical education. And I was very excited to be asked to moderate this talk today, and especially because maternal health is definitely something that I've devoted my career to, the earlier parts of my career, and it's definitely something that I'm passionate about personally and professionally. So thank you all so much for being here, and I would like to start by introducing you to our host for today, our host speaker. This is Dr. Alicia Hodge. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and speaker based in Washington, D.C. She received a master's in counseling psychology from Bowie State University, as well as a master's and doctorate degree in clinical psychology from the University of Hartford. Using the power of social media to reduce stigma, Dr. Alicia centers assisting people to overcome anxiety and perfectionism. She specializes in providing high-performing women with practical tips and skills in pursuit of wellness. She's also the founder of The Shift, a psychology and wellness service that offers therapy, clinical consultation, wellness workshops, and retreats. So thank you so much, and we're excited. I just wanted to say, feel free. We will be looking at the chat throughout the talk today. We definitely want it to be interactive. So even though you will be on mute, I will be able to read anything aloud in terms of questions. So we definitely want to have fun today. So welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me here. Also, I saw someone say in the chat, shout out to Bowie in the DMV area. So hello. Um, I am Dr. Alicia, and I, as mentioned, am a clinical psychologist. And today we'll be talking about motherhood with ease. And I'm pretty sure that if you are a mother, ease is probably not one of the first adjectives or words that you think about when it comes to motherhood. And ultimately, I think it is a really good description of how we can begin to approach motherhood and our thoughts about motherhood and our experience of motherhood truly, because it is a challenging job. But I think, especially in this week, we're highlighting Black maternal health, just the idea that our perspective goes a long way. And so before we sort of start, I too will do my best to also see the chat box. I welcome any questions or clarification of anything I say. But I like to sort of start so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about easing anxiety and burnout. And so, just to start, my specialty is working with women who experience anxiety. And I do like to share that anxiety is a natural emotion that we all have. We need it, it's important. It is there to sort of get your attention and get you going. So, for example, when you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to send an email, that is a burst of anxiety that gets you focused and in the right direction. Um, the issue is that when there is too much of that experience or it is disproportionate to a situation, we then lean into experiencing the negative aspect of anxiety or even an anxiety disorder. And so this is not meant to be diagnostic in any way, but some of the criteria in the experience of anxiety is as follows, which is experiencing nervousness, it can be tension, difficulty sleeping, so insomnia, restlessness or inability to concentrate, racing thoughts. It can manifest itself as GI issues, so intestinal things like stomach problems, irritable bowel. And the thing is that we've all, I'm sure, experienced rapid heartbeat or a sense of dread. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you have anxiety, but you know what it's like. However, anxiety, when mapped onto motherhood, can cause a degree of difficulty, meaning we may be really focused on overprotecting our child, worried about our child's future, worried about all of the things that we need to prepare, whether that be daily chores and activities or thinking long term into their future. And so it can be really challenging when you're trying to find the appropriate space because I think oftentimes when I talk to moms about being less anxious, they experience it as, oh, you just want me to take a carefree approach, like be a free range mom or a laissez-faire attitude. And that's not it at all. I absolutely am probably sometimes a helicopter mom myself. And so I understand the need and the importance of protecting and planning for our children, but it's also asking, what is driving me here? Um, is this from a loving and caring, supportive place? Or is this from a fear bound place? Is this a worry that if I don't do this now, then my child will be XYZ and making a negative prediction that feels scary? And so we'll talk about how to shift our mindset a bit around being overly anxious, whether it be again related to the tasks of motherhood or even who we are, our personhood as a mother. And then there's burnout, which is similar or adjacent, I guess is what I'll say, meaning you can have them both happen at the same time, anxiety and burnout. But burnout is much more diffuse and sometimes can show up as vague. And so, burnout, um, around the time of COVID, the World Health Organization decided to classify burnout as an actual disorder, as a medical condition, just based on the chronic, I think, people that were being seen for a variety of symptoms that all seem to have the same basis, which is the workplace. And so burnout is related to feeling overworked and exhausted. It is characterized by a sense of an inability to cope as well as you used to, being very cynical or not interested in the future, to sort of feel this perpetual malaise or down, depressed sort of feeling. But I think it's interesting that when we talk about burnout, everyone sort of first highlights the exhaustion. It's just feeling this perpetual exhaustion and potential dissatisfaction um, in our lives. And so, Melissa, I thought you were going to make a comment. I'm sorry. I thought you had something to say.
Oh no, I'm just typing in the chat here, but yes, absolutely, I have experienced burnout, and I think that is definitely something that we experience as moms and we experience as professionals and everywhere, everywhere in
Yeah.
between. So definitely, yeah, anxiety and burnout is something I think we can all identify with.
hmm And so, to paint the picture, when it comes to burnout, I will admit that a burnout has been a really catchphrase over the past, I would say, year or two. Everyone's burned out, which is true. However, I think it's important to highlight that burnout for Black women, women of color, is very different. It's significantly more, I think, entrenched in some of the other systemic issues that we face. And so, if we think about the workplace, things like wage gap, things like an environment that is not supportive of your personhood, being overlooked, not getting promotions, inevitably, just the impact of systemic racism adds a very strong layer to the experience of burnout for not only Black women, but then Black moms. And so we're talking about the concept of second shift when you go home after work, if you are someone who works full time, but even if not, you're working in any capacity. And then you are the person who may be the primary caregiver. That is an added layer of output and stress. And so, what I see in my practice and amongst my friends, to be honest, and sometimes myself, is that there is constant output and no input. And so, I think the first element of understanding how to shift to a place of ease or even less distress as a mother is not leaving yourself last. And I think it's very interesting because that seems maybe straightforward and obvious, but I think the paradoxical thing is that we take ourselves off the table almost immediately when we have a lot going on in our life. We will push our appointments, we'll get to that later, I'll do this later, 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 later. And essentially we know the to-do list is never ending and sometimes we never get to ourselves. But I think the important thing to consider is that you are the agent. If you are the mom, if you are the primary caregiver, if whoever you are the agent. And so you need to be restored and rested and capable to have capacity and bandwidth to do these things. And so it can be really difficult to put ourselves first, but I often tell people take one extra step and second to say, what do I want to do? What works for me? And so oftentimes someone will say, like, oh, well, I'll cancel this or I won't go here. Maybe stretch yourself to start to think about how else could this be done? I think that allows you the space to include people in your life who may be useful. And it also allows you the mental space, space, to take up actual space in your life and not feel resentful and extra exhausted, right? And I think what we realize is that burnout is a loop. It's not I go, I drop off, and then I start all over again from scratch until I burn out. It's much more like I've depleted the gas in my tank. I've almost essentially run out of gas on the side of the road. I'm just going to put in a little squirt and then I'll get back on the road. But I think that's why a lot of us are running on fumes because ultimately we haven't taken the time and had the ability to stop and take care of ourselves enough. And this doesn't mean a vacation. I think oftentimes we get this idea of like, well, Alicia, when would I take 2 weeks off? There is nothing you could do in 2 weeks that would cure your burnout. It can reset you. You can have this break from the mental load. You can have a break from responsibilities, but burnout is about behaviors and thoughts and cycles. And here's what I mean by that. The way that we approach things, we have a narrative or we have a thought process. And oftentimes when I'm working with someone who's experiencing burnout, they have the belief of it's all on me. I have to do it all by myself. Typically, there is some validity to that reality. But I often find that we overinflate or we tell ourselves, no one's going to do it as good as I would. It's going to take more time if I have to explain it to someone. And so you begin to absorb a lot of responsibility. I might as well do it. You know what? Forget it. I'll do it. And so what happens is that now you're carrying the responsibility of everyone. And when we talk about motherhood, I'm very aware that, of course, we're carrying the responsibility of our children. Um, However, if we have assistance, help, or support, it becomes very clear when I'm talking with someone if they are not necessarily calling on their support, if they're not considering their support, or if they're not simply asking for help. I think we see oftentimes um, the statements check on your strong friend. And I think there's a silent fight when you're a strong Black woman, which I am a little bit wanting to deter myself from even taking on that mantle. But I think when you're a strong person, you make things look easy. And so more than likely, people will not offer you help when you might need help because you are not appearing as though you need help. The other side of that is the less that you ask for help, the more fearful it is to ask for help. You may have some concerns about your impression management. How do I look? Will they actually come through? And I saw that someone made a comment about, I think, also feeling exhausted and kind of wondering like how to tackle that. I think the key is being in tune with yourself. The issue with anxiety, as we're talking about, is that you get pulled away from your body and you get pulled away from the moment and you're sort of living up here in the future. And what happens is you don't notice something's going on with me. Oftentimes that can be physically, that can be, oh, I just noticed that I haven't slept well for a month. And so I think the key to being grounded and present is really checking and using your senses. And as a mom, if you're feeling guilty about like when am I going to find time for myself, these are actually things that I suggest people do with their children to start. A, you get to spend some time with them using your senses. You're teaching them a very helpful skill. And so therefore you're modeling, which I think hopefully makes you feel good about your parenting and what you're contributing to your children. And so I say doing things like grounding, it can be breathing. It can be a quick 10-minute yoga practice, which you can find very easily on YouTube. You can take a walk. You can do sensory play with your children. You can do games like I Spy, because that's something that gets you down in the moment and noticing the present. Water play is a big uh, thing of mine that I really enjoy. And sorry, I'm pausing because I noticed that someone said something about narratives, right? And so, like you said, even I think a more updated version of the strong Black woman is Blacker magic. This idea that while we do have abilities to make things happen, it is an expectation that sort of becomes you, Black woman, ought to produce something out of nothing. When in reality, that is again much more output, not enough input. And I think people find, and women that I speak to find that when they produce something out of nothing, there sometimes is a lack of recognition that does not reinforce this level of output. Okay. And so I'm curious, as I talk, if anyone has any questions about anxiety, about burnout, about these strategies, or even uh, a query, or something that says like, how would I do that? I'm more than happy to answer that as well. But I do want to share some stats while I do that to give people time to ask questions. Um, One of the things that's very important to realize is that Black moms often experience frustration and exhaustion 40% more than their counterparts. And so this is an issue that is, while it's not unique to moms, the impact is very unique to our community. And so it is important to acknowledge and have an outlet. And that doesn't necessarily mean therapy. I, of course, as a psychologist, am always going to promote therapy throughout your lifetime, whether that be pregnancy, early childhood, and so on. But ultimately, identifying an outlet to express and verbalize your frustrations is really important. One of the things that we see that perpetuates the cycle of burnout in women is a lack of a social support network. And so I see oftentimes when I'm talking to my friends, we make jokes that the village is not villaging anymore. You know, my child's grandparents are a lot less interested in taking her for the summer, like I was taking care of her the whole summer. And so sometimes the outlet is simply alone time, right? And to have someone participate in childcare with you But I will admit, I think one of the impacts of the village not villaging is having less contacts with other women, older women, to support and discuss these experiences, to ask how did they manage, but also for you to share an updated experience. Because I think the other thing is that we are in an era that is much more open to sharing our feelings, to talking about the challenges of motherhood, to discussing frustrations. And oftentimes I do get feedback that some generations are like, you don't need to talk about that. We didn't do that. Just kind of put your head down and keep going. But I think that is lacking a recognition of how did it feel. And so if we're able to at least talk with other moms and talk about how this feels, there's even normalization in that. I think it was very freeing when I was getting together with some of my child's friends' mothers to say, like, is your child doing this? Just to check in. Is your child doing this? Do you feel this way? Are you worried about this? One of the things that I like to tell people is it is never too soon to think about something when it comes to your child, but it may be too soon to worry. So for those of you that live in metropolitan areas, I'm sure there's like when you're pregnant, you're already thinking about what daycare am I going to use? Because ultimately the spots fill up. And so you may be worried. But I like to tell people that preparing yourself for a potential catastrophe by experiencing it now is of no value. If anything, that just means you're going to experience the catastrophe twice. There is no such thing. Um, I'll be careful with my words, but there it is very unsuccessful to try to work yourself up and be prepared now. You will just be distressed for the entire duration. And so, taking that back to our title, Mothering with Ease, if you were to be uptight throughout your child's existence, you will have very little capacity to enjoy the experience of motherhood. Because I would hope that we've all at least had several moments where we're like, wow, in spite of all of the challenges and trials, this has been great, or today was great, or this moment was great, or that milestone was great. And so, mothering with ease is about perspective and perspective shift. And I'll give like a very concrete example of that. That is sort of a joke, but also true. More than likely, 80% of us have experienced a child drawing on something in our house that was not paper. And think about your response, your reaction, whether mentally and physically, to when you saw this happen. Some people, I'm sure most people were upset and or angry or worried about the value of what was written on and how this is awful, and then, and then, and then, and then, and then. But there may have been a few of you, and I'll say us because I did this once, but it was with previous coaching, so I don't want to take any credit, that were like, wow, what an interesting piece of art. And if you think about how our thoughts and our feelings, our behaviors are connected, the things that we think impact what we feel and what we subsequently do. And so for the parent, no judgment, that was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you did this. This is awful. They probably felt maybe angry, maybe anxious if something was ruined, um, and really sort of wanted to control and react strongly to the situation, right? So it's sort of like maybe you yelled, maybe you were already calculating how much it costs to clean that, right? And you experienced a lot of physical distress. But more than likely, the parent who looked at it and said, what an interesting piece of art that I wish was not on the wall. There's room for humor. There's room for connection with your child. There's room to be calm. There's room to think through why this maybe just isn't as bad as I thought it was. And so that is sort of a funny example. But my thought is if you can manage your perspective and or manage your emotions, you can certainly change the way that you think about something. And that is key to treating anxiety in general. And so when we're living in the future and we're worried very much about how will we do this? How will this happen? How will I ensure that my child gets into the perfect school, the perfect college? We will then be driven in an anxious process that has a strong impact on our bodies. in our brain and starts to begin this narrative of things not being enough or not going well, or again, feeding the idea that I have to do this all and I have to do everything. Thank you. Karen, you've made some really great comments. Thank you. And yes, Anika shared that the village, I'm assuming, needs a full reboot, and that many women are creating sisterhood groups for life for travel parenting, etc. I absolutely would put that in my top 5 tips, which I was getting to, but I'm gonna start sort of highlighting that now. That's a huge tip in terms of managing and disrupting the cycle of burnout is get your social support network to be very healthy and robust. And when I say robust, that doesn't mean in numbers. That means in the way that 1, 2, or 5 or 10 people show up and support you. And realize that it's nice to have an outlet. It can be sisterhood, it can be around motherhood, it can be around your other interests. And so it is important to do the self-exploration. And as I shared, like not leaving yourself for last, realizing that if I am the instrument and agent, I then need to schedule myself in as well and make myself a priority. And so that would mean social time. Again, I think a lot of times I find people maybe saying, like, I'm experiencing mom guilt, and when do I find time and get away? Um, I found a lot of solace in play dates with another mother, and our children are hopefully occupied with one another. And that can be a time of a break. And so I think it's important to reframe this idea that taking a break means I have to get on a plane and go to an island for 2 weeks. That is one of my favorite ways to take a break. And it is not always accessible and easy. And so the important thing about burnout is that you have to have a sustainable lifestyle. You cannot consistently have output without getting any input. I often tell people think about it like a road trip. It's important to make plans, plan out your rest stops, plan out your physical rest, plan out your quarterly rest. Those might be vacations. Set a bedtime for yourself. That's kind of like your daily rest indicator. And again, as a mother of a small child, I also understand how these things are difficult. And so I don't ever want to present myself as an expert sharing tips as though they are easy. But I totally think it's important to consider this is about you and about your longevity and about your experience. And so you're a very worthy investment. And so you might have to remind yourself of that when you notice that you're putting yourself for last. I wouldn't put my child last. I'd never. And so even by proxy, then I shouldn't put myself last because I need to be able to show up for her. Are there any questions? I just want to make sure I'm taking the opportunity to interact since I can't see anyone.
Yeah, and feel
Also,
free
do you have
to
any comments, Melissa?
Yes, no, I was just about to say, please put in the chat, definitely helps everyone. If there's different things that you do to prevent burnout, if you're able to add on to what Dr. Alicia just talked about in terms of, taking those rest stops or being able to just fit that into your daily schedule. Because once again, I mean, to think that we're going to go on a trip every time, that is definitely a life of luxury that most of us do not have. Anything like that can certainly help the group. And I know sometimes even just being able to get someone else's idea of what they're doing, it's like, whoa, I didn't even think about that. So, no,
Mm-hmm.
feel free to utilize the chat for those things. And certainly if you have any questions, but I definitely think everything that you're saying, Dr. Alicia, makes sense. And so, would you say there's a specific amount of time during the week that can help with preventing burnout? Like, is it 30 minutes a week? I know sometimes it could be dependent on the person and what's going on, but do you have any recommendations for mothers as far as that goes, or how to determine that?
Yeah. So I like to be structured but not prescriptive, if this makes sense. Only because I also want to acknowledge that there's a category of a type A person that is like, just give me the numbers, give me the tips, and then it'll be done. And I'm very aware that this is very much a process. And so I sort of like to quantify things by saying, just ensure that you're considering yourself once a day. And that looks different for everyone because I think this is very unique and prescriptive to a specific person. And so one person's considering themselves once that day might be, I'm gonna, I'm gonna stop and eat because they are that busy or that level of engaged. Another person may say, I'm going to go for a massage. And so I don't want to limit people at this point with what they should be doing exactly. But I think the more you get into and in touch with yourself and discover what makes me feel the most restored, you can just go to that thing. It may be a morning practice, it may be a night practice. The hardest thing about burnout recovery is that it takes another type of output and it's trial and error. And I think to a busy woman, it's like, I'm not, I am not about to take time exploring trial and error. Just please give me something that works. And so I just saw that someone shared some things. I do
Yes,
want to read these because they look really
yes.
good.
I can help you here. So
Please.
Natasha just had a question. She's basically said, finding social support has been a challenge for me. I'm sorry, what tips do you have for preventing burnout for those without that network?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what type of area you're in because I think that does contribute. Social support is difficult, meaning creating a new social network. I would encourage you, though, to think about it one person at a time, connecting with one person about one thing and realizing your network will build eventually. Either A, you'll meet a person through that person, or you will collect a couple of people and then maybe they end up connecting, or you at least feel like I have several options here. One thing I will say is if you are parenting a child that's in school, daycare, being involved in organizations, and I'm going to say this superficially. I don't want you to sign up to be the PTO president. I want you to just attend one meeting and speak to people afterwards and see, is there someone here that I maybe have something in common with? Did someone make a comment or say something that I related to? Maybe this is a person that has aligned values with me. But don't feel that engaging means that you're obligated in signing up. Expose yourself just briefly. Again, like I mentioned before, play dates. I've met other moms in that way. There are meetups depending on, again, the region that you live in. Sometimes you can look, I will say social media has a lot of different platforms that sort of try to grow experiencing in groups, things that you do with your children as well. You can meet people there, but I will admit at this juncture, it can be difficult to not have a convenient social support group. But I do think that you can create it. And again, remembering that it's about like the quality, and hopefully you'll be able to connect with someone. Also, though, if you can't have social support, because I'm just reading the question again, we'll talk about other things outside of social support. It's just something that I think is an element of keeping you sustainably with a particular outlet. And Anika actually suggested some really great things. She mentioned going outside, biking, running, walking, hiking, massages, spa days, journaling, reading, naps without interruption. Doing things for yourself is very important. And so I agree with her, putting it on your calendar. I think if you wait for an open moment, it just absolutely won't come. And so the same way we plan things out, activities, trips, meetings, etc., ensure that you are also searching your calendar and creating, not looking for a space, creating a space that feels good. Something that I do, I have the ability to do this a little bit more frequently because I make my own schedule, but I do something called a do not disturb day. I will put my phone on focus mode. I will not take any phone calls. I will not text. And I will take myself to lunch or dinner. Um, and preferably for myself in like an aesthetically pleasing place because I want to use my senses and stay grounded. And so I'm just looking around. I'm enjoying the option to eat something that is mine and mine alone that I don't have to share. I'm not interested in having a conversation. But it's a nice opportunity for me to listen to my inner voice. I think sometimes we're afraid to sit still because there's a lot of thoughts in there. But if that is your case, you're not really at the place where you can sit still, do an activity, do something while you're walking. Because I think movement can kind of give us a level of clarity outside of rumination.
And it looks like Anika has a great comment in terms of, now that we are so virtual, again, I think like you had said, Dr. Alicia, like in terms of the village not villaging, definitely we're finding more supports when it comes to virtual setup. So Anika suggested, if you go on Facebook or Google women's groups or whatever topic you may want, there are spoken word meetups, book clubs, etc. These may help connect. And I think one of the things that I think is great with that is it doesn't necessarily always have to be like connecting in a kid-centered way, right? It can also
Yeah.
be connecting to how you've identified even possibly before motherhood, maybe some of the things that you're feeling like you have not had the opportunity to do, or even just things that you want to explore. So
Hmm.
to rejuvenate yourself, because I think so many times we're thinking of just things that are like kid-based. But definitely, I know one of the big things for me when my son would go to sleep at night is just being able to get my time in of watching some TV that
Yeah.
was not kid related. So even just something like that was definitely huge. And also Marie did put in two mama groups on Facebook that
Perfect.
can
Thank
also
you,
be
Marie.
used.
And I think you're making a good point about having that me focused adult time because it is very important to reconnect with who you were and are after you have children because it is you. You're the same person. You're just wearing a different hat a little bit differently. But I think by finding and remembering your genuine and authentic self, it, I would hope that it could be seen as like that it has a ripple effect. The impact is that I bring a more authentic self to my child. I'm able to share more about my likes and interests and show up and teach them boundaries too. Like one of the things that I really appreciate about this type of work and trying to understand who am I and how do I relate to the world is that you are a strong model to your child in a positive way to let your child know that you have boundaries, that maybe I can't do that right now, that I am considering myself, teaches them that it's actually okay um, for that to be a thing, that they can grow up and consider themselves and not feel absorbed into, I think, the world around them. Because I think oftentimes you can end up with some feelings of resentment. And so it's okay to revisit. I often tell people, think about when you were young. A lot of times we are focused on work and side hustles, that the idea of a hobby is lost. And a hobby is something that you do simply because you like it. It doesn't necessarily produce anything. It doesn't have to be good. You're not selling it. It's just something that you like to do that brings you joy. And so sometimes I tell people recapture and think about when were you most excited as a kid? What did you like doing? Um, and see what that's like at this level. It doesn't have to be the same. But I think it gives you some clues into what your interests are.
There's also just some great continued suggestions in the chat in terms of Black Moms Connection. Seems like that's a group that Anika just referenced.
Okay.
Uh, so yes, definitely. I mean, and again, Marie even mentioned if you don't have a group near you, maybe it's an opportunity to start a group, whether that's virtual, whether that's geographic, and sometimes even just taking turns too. You don't always have to be the point person. Like you were saying, Dr. Alicia, it's like you can go to a PTO meeting, PTA meeting, but you don't need to be the president to feel like you're doing something. So
Right.
again, attending and being part of that, but not always having to take the full lead, maybe sharing that responsibility is huge as well. So, no, thank
And
you.
in line with that comment, I did see that Marie earlier made a note asking, how can we have recruit partners um, to assist? Because I do think that is very important. I think that's also the benefit and asset of partnership. And so, if that is an option to you, I certainly encourage people to ask themselves, what am I carrying that either first that I'd like that I can put down? Oftentimes the answer to that is like, there's nothing. There's nothing I can put down. And I say, okay, what would you like to put down? Because ultimately, I think like a good example or maybe a visual is that if you're in a boat with a couple of different people, and you're like furiously paddling and the boat is going and they're just kind of sitting there with their oar, like waiting. Only until you sort of stop paddling or ask for some collaboration or coordination will things go as smoothly as they could. And so oftentimes it feels very scary to pull back because I think there are some ideas and thoughts around like what will fall off, failure, will my kids suffer if I'm waiting for my partner to kind of chip in? I think you can be pretty clear about one or two things that you want to delegate or need assistance with, but then also you have to be hands off. It can't be like a micromanage. It has to be a hands off and sort of an understanding of like, I'm going to let somebody else paddle a little bit to see if we can get further. Because if you're the only one paddling, you may do well, but you could go further if you and your partner find some sort of rhythm or in sync around certain things. And it also frees you up to be more available to yourself.
I think that's a great idea as well, in terms of a lot of times we just think that people intuitively know what we need. So a lot of times it's like, you can hold some resentment when it's like, why is this person just not helping me in this moment? And they're not realizing where they need to jump in or how they can support. And just assuming that everyone knows what we want and how we want it is not the
Hmm.
case. And also being proactive in that, not waiting until you feel like you're about to explode before saying, like, I need this help. I think that's
Yeah.
really important as well, just being proactive.
I think delegation has to be a really important part of your strategy. So when you're planning, if you plan to execute the entire plan and then notice this is going to be difficult, I think it can be a lot harder to pivot and then delegate because it sort of feels like again at its extreme a failure. But I think if in the planning phase you're like, how am I going to delegate? Who's going to do what? Who can I ask to help with this? It becomes a part of your plan versus like it feels like the failed option. Yeah. So I will say that I think is one Natasha made a comment, like I feel like some of these things are common sense or intuitive. And so I think that I'm just gonna be a little biased here, we as women are very good at spotting a problem, certain types of problems and attending to it. That's not to say that partners of any kind are not good at that. But I think that we're inside of ourselves, we see things a lot clearer. And so ultimately, getting in the practice and habit of asking allows you to that to even be less of a novel event. Because a lot of times people, when I'm talking to them about, well, why don't we just ask your partner? We then realize there's a lot of work leading up to the ask. There's a lot of thoughts of like, well, what does that mean about me? I've been doing it this whole time. What will they think? How will I feel? What if they don't do it the way that I want them to do it? And so that's a lot of inner work. I say, well, in the meantime, while we figure that out, just ask. Let's just start with the action. We can work backwards. Well, what if my partner is not who I thought they were? Let's just ask first. Those are anxious thoughts. Those are what ifs based in something a little bit catastrophic. Because, yes, I would be afraid to ask if I think that this is going to give me the answer if my partner is a great partner or not. When in reality, it might just give me an answer is my partner good at signing the homework every night or not? Not necessarily their entire character.
No, that's definitely some great information. If we flip that around, how do have you ever had a scenario, or how would you give advice when it comes to maybe telling someone something that you don't like? That could be a partner, that could be an in-law, because that can sometimes give a lot of anxiety, obviously not wanting to create conflict.
Mhm.
How would you, go about that? Because I think sometimes that's a big thing, especially even just in terms of our child's care providers. It's
Mhm.
not, we can't do everything ourselves, but it might be something that's really causing us anxiety. And how do we handle those kind of things?
Yeah, so sort of like speaking with someone and asking them to change or restrict a behavior. Hard conversations are hard, is what I'll say, first and foremost. I think no matter who you are and what type of training, so I say that to just normalize the fact that it's hard for me to have hard conversations. Um, the first thing that I like to do is ground myself before I actually have the conversation. So that means just managing my like physical self through like a little bit of deep breathing, kind of like noticing where I'm feeling tension or maybe the anxiety, and then circling back to my why. Why do I want or need to have this conversation? And so if it's about health, if it's about safety, those are sort of things that I encourage people to push past a little bit forcefully because I think that there's a greater call there. Then there's another level where if you're wondering, it helps you distinguish and have clarity around, is this about rightness? I just don't like that. Is this just a strong preference? And so you, as a parent, you have a right to say anything about anything. But I often tell people, can we manage this within ourselves enough that we don't need to try to get somebody else to manage it? In your example, that may be a no. And so I would focus solely on my whys in that conversation because the reality of it is that we can say as much as we can and it's up to another person to change their behavior. But I think if you go in with trying to get a buy-in and letting someone understand the rationale of what you're doing, typically you guys can come to some sort of agreement. Oh, good, that's helpful. Someone says implementing sort of like the delegation has allowed their partner to show up for them. Oh, Marie mentioned fair play cards. No, I haven't heard of those. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. I
okay.
was going to say, it sounds like we might all need a pack of the fair play cards, Marie.
I
I
know.
have to look
Maybe they
into that.
help
I
us.
haven't
They
heard
help
that.
you have conversations.
Yes. So she said the Fair Play book delivers a time and anxiety saving system that offers couples a completely new way to divvy up their domestic responsibilities. So,
Oh, that is actually very cool. That might be really interesting.
yes.
But I do
Oh,
like
that's
the idea,
great.
like the important thing to realize with the majority of this is practice. Um, Things do not quite feel comfortable until we do them a few times. And so one of the most, I think, inspiring phrases is that the things that we want are on the other side of discomfort. So most of the things that I want, I just need to pass through the discomfort and I will get to it. To include a calmer nervous system, because I think I have to face the patterns that I'm doing and then also acknowledge there will be discomfort in changing my pattern. And what I like to encourage people is that if you're going to do discomfort, at least do it for yourself. Don't sort of exist in discomfort and distress and say, like, oh, I'm just not willing to make any changes. Sort of say, like, okay, well, if I'm already uncomfortable, why don't I like take the wheel and do some specific uncomfortable things that might get me in the direction of what I'm looking for, which is more calm, more restoration, more. I don't like the word balance, just to be fair, because I think balance implies visually that things are even, and I don't believe that's the case at all. Life, let alone motherhood, anything. And so I think reframing this idea that at times something will take more from me, and that as long as I am sort of actively and intentionally making these choices, you can proceed through life as though you are life is not happening to you. You are doing something about it.
Marie mentions in the chat too, one of the big issues is even just overcoming those gender stereotypes and roles like this is women's work, this is men's work. And as we know, things have only become more complicated and more expensive in our society. So much of us are doing so many different things like our regular job, a side gig, maybe we don't have a partner that's with
Hmm.
us. Maybe we don't have a partner at all, but maybe we have a partner that works an opposite shift just to be able to manage childcare. So I think people are having to come up with creative ways, and those stereotypes can certainly come in the way of that, of
They
getting that
definitely
help.
can. And I think that's the piece around maybe having the discomfort of a hard conversation and reassessing from there. Because again, things take time. Um, Nothing is decided and nothing happens in a day and nothing gets solved in a day. And so I don't do couples counseling, but I do recommend it sometimes to my client if the one person is coming to me talking about some of the difficulties and challenges around like roles or um, even just communication. I think couples therapy can be useful in understanding like the narrative of your relationship. How did we get here? Um, because nothing happens in a silo. And so then you have potentially more insight and information around how do we get here and what are some of the things that we need to change so that we're both coming into and getting this relationship that works for the both of us. Yeah. And sort of reframing it as work is work, like household contribution versus it being solely gendered. Mm. Yes, I agree. We're absolutely not a monolithic group at all. And I think that it is unfortunate when we are seen as such. And I think that that impact is actually seen in some of the numbers. So, like some of the stats that I shared are about Black women as a whole, but yet there's so much diversity and difference amongst us. It can become, um, I think, I'll use the word confusing for other groups at times to sort of figure out how to approach us. And that's why I'm a big fan of sort of understanding and knowing some of the limitations of our environment. And it's not so much that we can't advocate for ourselves, but I think all of us just simply returning to ourselves and finding out what's the best scenario for us and how do we have a sustainable and meaningful lifestyle, um, given that we're all different.
Does anyone have any specific questions for Dr. Alicia or anything they'd like to share with the group in terms of anxiety, burnout, preventing those things, or even just what are some of the things that give you a lot of anxiety or burnout? I'm sure there's a lot of commonalities in terms of, some of the things that we worry about that we think maybe we're the only ones, and we realize, no, actually, most of us are actually worried in the same way. And we're losing sleep over that, or just, having physical symptoms, as you said in the beginning, Dr. Alicia. So feel free to put in the chat any questions you may have, any ideas to share with the group. Any comments are certainly welcomed as we're nearing the end of this workshop.
I saw someone mention a happiness list, but I didn't see what it meant or happy list. And then also, I wanted to say something just relevant to the concept of ease, hopefully, a statistic or a concept that will give you some ease as a parent. There was some research done, and I'm going to paraphrase this, so please do not quote me entirely. But the concept of parenting and the time and investment that we need to give to our kids, I think sometimes we feel overwhelmed at like, I got to be on it, all these activities, doing all these things in their face 24/7. The study essentially found that you have to be a good enough mom. And what good enough means is that you need to give your child 30% of like, I want to say 30% of your time, but only 30% of the time, 30% of focus on them. You don't have to be eye to eye all the time, but it is a very low threshold to meet. And so I often tell people to adopt that concept as a whole. Just be kind of good enough. On the days that you know that you are not 100%, it is okay to not be 100%. If you're 50%, you're 50. If you're 30, you're 30. But essentially, chances are you are doing all of the things that you need to do. And that the desire and the drive to do more is simply you responded to discomfort. And that has probably been your pattern. Oh, if I'm sort of feeling a little inadequate, I'll just do more. And that will be my proof. But once we get to this point in life, there's kids, there's work, there's friends, there's life, there's no grades anymore. And so we're making up our own grading system. And oftentimes I find that women, if they're not giving themselves an A, then they're giving themselves an F. But there's other grades in between. And so, maybe go for the B because the concept is that you are more than likely good enough in doing everything that you need to do. And the other thing I tell every parent is that if you are worried about parenting, chances are you're not a bad parent. because I believe that bad parents, quote unquote, are not considering their parenting.
That's a great point.
Being honest, yes, being honest with yourselves and each other is very useful. So I will just, for summary, just kind of make like a summation of some of the things I talked about, just in case someone came towards the end. I do want to make the point that Black women are at risk to experience burnout at a higher rate than their counterparts. And I didn't even put a thumbs down, but I agree. However, there are things that we can do to live a sustainable lifestyle. And the first thing is considering how to prioritize our capacity. And that means looking for opportunities for self care, for social support, and restoration. And that can be through activities. But really reminding yourself that this is a journey. And so in a marathon, you pace yourself and you take time. The goal is not to race and do as much as possible. The goal is to consistently make progress with feedback. And with that feedback is checking in with yourself. When do I need breaks? When do I need rest? When do I need to say no? When do I need to ask for help? And of course, if anyone sort of heard themselves in some of the descriptions at an extreme or disproportionate rate in terms of symptoms or severity, I would encourage you to at least have a consultation with a therapist. Most of them are free, only for 15 minutes. I also want to share a resource. A friend of mine, Dr. Amber Thornton, wrote a book um, about how to regulate yourself as a parent. And I want to give you the appropriate title. But I think that she's really highlighted and captured this idea that in order to show up and parent adequately and effectively, the key is to regulate yourself. And her book is called A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. Thank
And
you.
you
Thanks,
said,
Marissa.
oh, is it Dr. Amber Thornton?
Amber
Amber
Thornton. Yeah.
Thornton. Thornton. Okay.
The marathoner agrees. Take your time, pace yourself. Thank you for the link, Marie. Yeah. So if anyone is interested in staying connected with me, Marie shared my website. There's lots of information about me there, how to contact me, or just some of the services that I offer. I'm also spend most of my time on Instagram. So I'm not a fan of someone who says like, oh, if you have anxiety, put down social media. I'm like, no, no, no. You can curate it. You can make a fake Instagram page that has nothing but like calm, wholesome content. Um, but yes, I do spend a lot of time there also sharing tips and information about anxiety and how to overcome burnout as a woman, Black woman specifically.
No, thank you so much. I think this was definitely helpful for expected moms, new moms, some of us veteran moms like myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely, it's always nice to be able to, get back in touch with ourselves and just for a healthier approach because it does help us and as well as everyone around us in our communities. And we've got a lot on our plate. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your input. It was definitely great to have you all here. And, please stay in touch. Their series will continue the rest of the week for Black Maternal Health Awareness Week. And thank you so much, Marie, the head of Birthing the Magic. You've been amazing. Thank you so much for letting us be here today and sharing in this community space. We definitely appreciate all of it. And I will certainly be using your strategies, Dr. Alicia. So thank you
Yeah.
all. We hope to see you again and please reach out.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.